No country owns the world's oceans, but one nation has built a system to control them. With around 290 battle forces, a third of which are deployed at any given time, the US Navy projects power like no other. Right now, some of that power moves through the crowded, contested waters of the South China Sea. And here, distance is everything. The farther a ship is from home, the harder it is to keep it supplied, maintained, and ready. Even the most powerful navies feel it. And in a crisis, slow can mean defeat. War doesn't hand out participation prizes. So the United States came up with a workaround. Rather than send ships to a conflict or a region, you just keep them there. This is the doctrine of the Forward Deployed Naval Force, known as the FDNF. Instead of keeping the fleet in San Diego or Norfolk and rushing them to a war zone, the US parks ships on the doorsteps of its rivals. Permanent presence, immediate response. To manage this, the world is carved into specific zones of responsibility: the Atlantic and the Arctic, the Pacific, East and West, in the waters around the Middle East, in the Mediterranean, and Central and South America. And there's also one more domain where the battle you can't see takes place. That's cyber warfare. This setup forms an invisible barrier around the Eurasian landmass, but knowing the names of the fleets doesn't make them deadly. To understand that, you have to look at the core block, the Carrier Strike Group. It's a self-contained air force, powerful enough to level a small nation. The centerpiece is a Nimitz or Ford-class nuclear carrier. It houses an air wing of over 70 aircraft, including FA-18 Super Hornets and F-35C Lightning IIs. Thanks to its importance, the carrier never moves alone. Flanking it is at least one Ticonderoga-class cruiser. Its job is air defense coordination, tracking hundreds of targets at once to make sure nothing touches the carrier. Surrounding them are 2 or 3 Arleigh-Burke-class destroyers. They handle anti-submarine warfare and missile defense. And lurking under the waves is a nuclear attack submarine, scouting the route ahead for enemy threats. All in all, it's a seagoing fortress. When a crisis erupts, the first question isn't who's involved, it's where are the carriers? Their location tells you everything. Take the U.S. 7th Fleet, headquartered in Yokosuka, Japan. This is the front line. The USS George Washington is the only U.S. carrier permanently homeported outside the United States, along with its escort ships like the USS Mustin and USS Antietam. It doesn't just visit the East China Sea, it lives there. Data from the U.S. Naval Institute shows that these forward-deployed units log over 100,000 sailing hours annually, operating the typhoon corridors of the Pacific and the contested waters of the South China Sea. This solves any reaction time problem. By the time a customized response force could sail from California to Taiwan, that war would be over. The FDNF ensures that the response is instantaneous. But presence isn't just about escalating conflict. It's about political influence. When a U.S. carrier docks in Vietnam or the Philippines, it's more than just a visit. It's a signal. A defense treaty isn't just words on a piece of paper. The security guarantee is pretty real, and it's physical. On the flip side, the Navy conducts freedom of navigation operations known as FONOPs. This means sailing a destroyer straight through waters that nations like China claim as their own, specifically the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea again. And it's about the optics. It proves that no single nation owns the ocean. By keeping roughly 30% of its fleet deployed at all times, the U.S. Navy ensures the shared oceans stay open and navigable. Open waterways can be deceiving, and that brings us to choke points. Oh, and if you like these US deep dives, make sure to like and subscribe. I'm somehow describing global maritime dominance without a single admiral shouting at me. Anyway, maritime geography is not uniform. Global trade doesn't flow freely across every mile of ocean. It usually funnels through a handful of narrow passages. The Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal. Control these choke points and you rule the world's flow of power and trade. And the US Navy has turned that into a science. Today, over 80% of global trade moves by sea. The stability of these routes underpins everything from US energy prices to stock market confidence. Naval dominance isn't just military leverage, it's economic gatekeeping. A key choke point in the world right now is the Bab al Mandeb. Known as the Gate of Tears, this strait connects the Indian Ocean to the Suez Canal. If you close this gate, ships can't reach the Mediterranean. The only other route is around Africa. For years, Houthi rebels in Yemen have been targeting this vital corridor with anti-ship ballistic missiles and drones. In response, the US launched Operation Prosperity Guardian. Very American. Destroyers like the USS Laboon and USS Mason positioned themselves between drones and vulnerable container ships. This exposes the difference in naval power. The Houthis deploy drones costing around $20,000, while the Navy shoots them down with SM-2 missiles costing $2 million each. It's not an ideal exchange rate, and kind of the worst scenario for a choke point. It forces the Navy into a protective position in a confined space. In 2017, the USS John S. McCain collided with a merchant vessel near the Strait of Malacca, simply because the waters were too crowded to navigate safely. But if you can guarantee safe passage through these 5 geographic points, you stabilize the world markets. And if you deny passage, you can cripple a country. But parking a ship in the middle of the ocean brings its own problems. There's a saying in some military circles: amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. And it's a vital lesson. No nation on Earth can match the United States' ability to keep a fleet fed, fueled, and armed no matter where they are. That logistical capability doesn't just sustain warships, it sustains the credibility of U.S. trade protection worldwide. During high-tempo flight operations, an air wing can burn through 400,000 gallons of jet fuel per day. The crew of 5,000 sailors consumes tons of food. The ammo stores need to be restocked with thousands of pounds of precision ordnance. If a carrier has to return to port to resupply, it stops being a weapon. It leaves a dangerous gap in the line, and at that point, it's just a very expensive parking spot. The US Navy solves this with the underway replenishment known as UNREP. A supply ship pulls alongside the carrier, both moving at 12 to 15 knots and just 160 feet apart. In the middle of the ocean, often in heavy seas, they fire shot lines across the gap, rig tensioned span wires, and transfer fuel hoses and pallets of ordnance. They do this at night, under radio silence. This is what allows the US Navy to turn a carrier group into a constant threat. In 2020, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower spent 206 consecutive days at sea. For 7 months, it remained fully combat effective because the logistics train came to it. No other navy can do this at this scale. While the Soviet Union built a navy to defend their coast, the US built a navy for sea control, and that requires staying power. But this is also its weak spot. Today, the US Navy's logistical fleet is a shadow of its former glory. The average age of the Ready Reserve Force is over 45 years. In a conflict with China, these unarmed supply ships would be the primary targets. China doesn't need to sink a carrier, they just need to sink the oilers. The logistics chain is the vulnerable part of the American giant. Naval planners are currently scrambling to boost it, but you can't build a new support fleet overnight. It's a race against time, and one they hope they can win. But there's more to just being at sea indefinitely. In the age of sail, a lookout in the crow's nest could see maybe 12 miles on a clear day. Today, the fleets see far beyond the horizon. Planes sweep the skies, ships watch the waves, satellites scan the oceans. Every platform feeds information into one shared picture, letting commanders track movement, see threats, and respond before danger reaches them. A missile could appear over the horizon, unseen by the ship below, yet the fleet already knows it's coming. Sensors in the air, on sea, and even in space feed the data to the right place at the right time. The ships act together, as if connected by a single mind. The result isn't just defense, it's situational awareness. The fleet can act sooner, strike farther, and control the space around it without ever exposing itself. But the game continues to change. Hypersonic missiles can travel at Mach 5, over 3,800 miles an hour. That's reduced reaction time from minutes to seconds, and that means modern solutions. The Navy is currently implementing Project Overmatch, an AI-driven initiative to automate the sorting of targets. Instead of relying on human reaction, the network will decide what to shoot. With the surface, logistics, and airwaves covered, the single most decisive advantage the United States holds is not visible. It's lurking hundreds of feet beneath the surface. This is the one domain where the United States still holds a clear edge. If aircraft carriers are the show of force, submarines are the hidden threat. In a full-scale conflict with an adversary like China, surface ships are vulnerable. They can be tracked by satellites. They can be targeted by carrier-killer missiles. But the deep ocean remains the one domain where stealth still rules. The U.S. Navy's submarine force is unique in the world for one specific engineering reason. It's 100% nuclear. Most nations, including Russia and China, operate mixed fleets. They have some nuclear boats, but they rely heavily on diesel-electric submarines. A diesel sub is quiet, but it has a weakness. It has to surface to recharge its batteries. A U.S. Virginia-class fast-attack submarine can travel thousands of miles at high speed without surfacing. It's almost entirely self-sufficient. It creates its own oxygen by electrolyzing seawater. It distills its own drinking water. The only limit is the amount of food they can carry. Typically, that's about 90 days of complete invisibility. To maintain dominance, the U.S. uses the ocean's thermal layers. The ocean is layered by temperature. Sound waves bend when they hit these temperature changes. A U.S. commander can hide his boat beneath a thermal layer, using the temperature difference to bounce enemy sonar pings away. He disappears. This underwater dominance is split into two distinct missions. First, the Hunter Killers, or SSNs. These are the Los Angeles, the Seawolf, and Virginia-class boats. They hunt enemy submarines and sink them before they can threaten the carriers. But they're also strike platforms. They carry Tomahawk cruise missiles. They can strike targets 1,000 miles inland without ever surfacing. In the opening minutes of Operation Odyssey Dawn in Libya in 2011, it wasn't an aircraft carrier that kicked down the door. It was the USS Florida, a guided missile submarine. It fired over 90 cruise missiles in single quick shots. It wiped out the Libyan air defense network before they knew the war had started. And second, there are the missile subs, or SSBNs. These are the Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines. At any given moment, several of these are patrolling the deepest parts of the ocean, relying on their stealth to stay hidden. Each carries up to 20 Trident II D5 missiles. Just one of these submarines carries enough nuclear firepower to level every major city in a mid-sized nation. Their existence ensures that no matter how hard an enemy strikes the U.S. mainland, the retaliation will be absolute. The U.S. has a fleet of around 60 subs. That pressure freezes maritime operations globally. When you combine these 5 levers, presence, choke points, logistics, information, and undersea control, you get a system of complete control. This enables the U.S. to contain conflicts. It allows them to disrupt supplies. It allows them to shape the outcome before the first shot is fired. Think back on the Cold War era. The U.S. Navy kept a strong presence in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. They controlled key choke points like the GI-UK Gap. Their forward ships and better info let them track Soviet subs early, and good supplies meant they could stay out longer than the Soviets ever could. In the 1991 Persian Gulf War, U.S. naval forces were already deployed to the Middle East as part of Operation Desert Shield. These forces secured critical routes and allowed the rapid buildup of coalition troops. Supplies, reinforcements, and firepower could reach the front lines without delay. Subs cleared out dangers underwater. This let the Navy support the coalition air campaign and ground offensive by effectively shutting down the Iraqi Navy. At this point, it might seem like the U.S. Navy is nigh invincible, but it's not. The system was built for a different era, a world where the U.S. had no rival. That world is gone. The U.S. naval machine is facing 4 existential threats that money can't easily fix. The most immediate crisis facing the U.S. Navy isn't tactical, it's actually industrial. In the 1980s, under the Reagan administration, the U.S. fleet peaked at nearly 600 ships. It was a giant. Today, the battle force hovers around 290 ships. Meanwhile, the People's Liberation Army Navy of China has grown. They've surpassed the US in hull count, operating over 370 battle force ships. But the raw numbers mask the real story. The problem isn't just the ships, it's the shipyards. China is the world's shipbuilder. In a single year, Chinese shipyards launch more tonnage than the United States produces in 3. They operate on a war footing 24/7. They have a massive commercial shipbuilding sector that can instantly pivot to military production. In contrast, the US shipbuilding industrial base has atrophied. During the Cold War, the US had dozens of public and private shipyards capable of building complex warships. Today, that number has collapsed. There are only a handful of dry docks in North America capable of building or repairing nuclear carriers. This creates a significant industrial bottleneck. In a high-intensity naval war, ships get damaged. If a US carrier takes a missile hit, it has to limp back to one of the very few dry docks available. It could be out of the fight for years. If a Chinese carrier gets hit, they have dozens of commercial shipyards ready to fix it. They can patch it up and send it back out in months. In a war of attrition, the side that can replace its losses faster usually wins. For the first time in a century, the United States has lost that advantage. China has studied the American playbook. They know the US has blue water superiority, so they decided to rig the game. They invested billions into a strategy known as anti-access area denial, or A2AD. The logic is pretty simple. Don't fight the carrier. Eliminate the carrier before it gets to the fight. China has built a huge arsenal of land-based ballistic missiles known as carrier killers. These aren't standard cruise missiles. They're ballistic missiles capable of hitting a moving target 2,000 miles away. They launch into the edge of space and come screaming down at hypersonic speeds. This creates a death zone extending thousands of miles from the Chinese coast. In order to conduct combat sorties over Taiwan, a US carrier would have to sail directly inside the range of these missiles. This neutralizes the US presence mentioned earlier. If the carriers stay outside the death zone, their jets don't have the range to reach the target. If they go inside, they risk being targeted themselves. And then there's the manpower. The US Navy is currently facing its worst recruiting shortfall in decades. Americans are less interested in military service. The private sector pays better. The physical standards are also disqualifying more applicants than ever before. The result is that ships are deploying undermanned. And it's not just an HR problem, it's a safety crisis. When a ship is short-staffed, the remaining sailors have to work longer shifts, leading to burnout, fatigue, and fatal mistakes. And the last threat is the water itself. Climate change is reshaping naval operations in a way that is rarely discussed. The world's largest naval base, Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia, is sinking. Rising sea levels and land subsidence mean the base floods regularly. According to estimates, the backlog of repairs for infrastructure damage is over $1.8 billion. The Navy is spending money raising piers and hardening power grids, money that should be spent on missiles and ships. In the Pacific, typhoons are becoming more intense. This disrupts logistics. You can't resupply and refuel in a Category 5 storm. Simultaneously, the supply chain for the weapons themselves is vulnerable. The most advanced US radars and missiles rely on high-end microchips. The vast majority of these chips are manufactured in Taiwan. This is the ultimate irony. The US Navy needs chips to defend Taiwan, but it needs Taiwan to get the chips. In war games conducted by RAND in 2023, simulations showed that if China blockaded Taiwan, the US defense industrial base would run out of critical components within weeks. This creates a use-it-or-lose-it dilemma, and the admirals know this. Recognizing these vulnerabilities, the Navy is undergoing its most radical transformation since the invention of the aircraft carrier. It's called Distributed Maritime Operations, or DMO. The days of the massive carrier strike group huddle are ending. DMO is the strategy of scattering the fleet. Instead of presenting one big target, the Navy wants to present 1,000 small ones. A destroyer goes here, a frigate goes there, a marine unit sets up a mobile missile battery on a tiny rock in the Philippines. By spreading out, they force the enemy to waste millions of dollars in surveillance assets trying to find them. They dilute the enemy's firepower. But to make this work, The Navy needs numbers. So the Department of Defense has launched the Replicator Initiative, a program to develop and field a number of autonomous platforms across land, sea, and air. Imagine a future where unmanned surface vessels, or USVs, extend the US Navy's reach and presence. Some USVs are being developed with advanced sensors that could contribute to detecting submarines, and future, larger classes will carry missile payloads. This shifts the cost curve. Right now, if China fires a $2 million missile at a $13 billion aircraft carrier, China wins the economic exchange. But if China fires a $2 million missile at a $2 million drone boat, it's just hardware. Under the waves, the Navy is developing the Orca XL-UUV, or Extra Large Unmanned Undersea Vehicle. This is a drone submarine that can autonomously lay minefields in enemy harbors. It can sit on the ocean floor for listening and waiting. This is the answer to the A2AD bubble. You don't send a carrier into the death zone, you send the drones. But the US is realizing it can't go it alone. It's doubling down on its alliances to create strategic depth. The AUK-US pact between Australia, the UK, and the US is the biggest shift in Pacific power in decades. The US is sharing its nuclear propulsion technology with Australia. The goal is to give Australia its own fleet of nuclear-powered attack submarines. And this is a nightmare for Beijing. Currently, Chinese planners only have to worry about US subs coming from Guam or Hawaii. Soon, they'll have to worry about high-end nuclear subs launching from Perth, deep in the southern hemisphere. For decades, the US Navy ruled the world's oceans. That dominance was built in an era without a peer naval competitor. Today, that assumption no longer holds. The Stars and Stripes may no longer dominate every sea. In modern naval warfare, standing still isn't safe, and it can mean being sunk. The US must adapt or risk falling behind. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack. On October 28, 2025, Hurricane Melissa didn't just hit Jamaica, it shattered the dream of paradise. The damage it left behind wasn't just physical, it was geopolitical. Now, Caribbean nations face a terrifying reality. One storm can erase everything, and the worst part? There's almost nothing they can do to stop it. A disaster this massive doesn't just create wreckage, it creates dependency. When a storm this size hits Florida or Texas, there's a continent behind it to absorb the blow. Resources can move in by land, the economy has depth. But islands? They have nowhere to hide. 7,000 islands, and most of them are empty. That's not paradise. That's pretty proper isolation. Take a look at a map. The Bahamas is a country suffering because of its geography. 74% of the population live in the capital, Nassau. Now look at the map again. Notice anything? Nassau is only 180 miles from Miami. That's a short hop for a tourist, but it's a death sentence for a truly independent Caribbean. It means the center of Bahamian life is closer to the United States than it is to its own territory. The Bahamian Islands stretch all the way to Great Inagua Island, 370 miles away. At that distance, coordinating defense or providing government support is nearly impossible, leaving remote islands largely on their own. And that means you're a sitting duck. Across the Pacific, the best defense for islands hasn't been walls, guns, or alliances. It was being undiscovered. The moment outsiders found them, they were exposed, vulnerable. And the Caribbean, that was the testing ground. Every invasion, every empire, every trade war, it started here. Take Hispaniola. It's split in two, not because the future Dominican Republic and Haiti naturally belonged on opposite sides of a border, but it's because of imperial capitals thousands of miles away. The locals? They didn't matter. When you live on a small island, you're at the mercy of a lot of things, and the worst of them, often other humans. And that's when you realize the Caribbean didn't just become a paradise paradise by accident. It became the most scenic playground for the world's great powers. When Columbus made landfall in 1492, thousands of miles from where he thought he was, he had a startling revelation. The locals were completely defenseless, and not just because germs were invisible killers. The islands themselves were traps, isolated, easy to exploit, and that's what they did. Forced labor, land grabs, and slaughter. On Hispaniola alone, at least a few 100,000 Taino lived there when Columbus arrived. Just 20 years later, only 32,000 remained. That's a 90% collapse. Across the Caribbean, indigenous peoples were either wiped out, scattered into small isolated communities, or absorbed into future generations. Geography had built them a paradise and made them vulnerable. And it didn't stop there. Spain learned the islands were perfect for exploitation, and so did everyone else. France muscled into Hispaniola, drawing the border that still splits it today. Britain forced Spain out of Jamaica. The Dutch decided Aruba had salt they needed. Each empire arrived with a different flag and the same intention. By 1823, the Americas were the United States' backyard. The Monroe Doctrine was just a piece of paper at first, but the Caribbean would have to live by it. Spain held on to Cuba for centuries, but when Theodore Roosevelt decided to take an interest, Spain couldn't defend it. It couldn't hold on to Puerto Rico either. One island changed hands immediately, and the US still looms over the other. The Soviets didn't just retreat after the Cuban Missile Crisis, they made themselves part of Cuba's intelligence network, the Lord's Signals Intelligence Complex south of Havana. They had eyes on America's backyard. The Iron Curtain eventually fell, and the Soviets were gone, and America seemed to reign supreme in the region, even to this day. 500 years, one pattern. The Caribbean islands are easy playthings for the world's great powers. And if you like these geography deep dives, make sure to hit subscribe. I've spent so much time researching Caribbean islands, I might need a vacation myself just to recover. You would think modern technology would ease the pressure on the Caribbean islands. The indigenous people couldn't get the word out when the conquistadors arrived. Today, it's different. Cell networks, social media, the world is interconnected. So why haven't the Caribbean islands built a political or economic union like the EU? Once again, it comes down to location, location, and location. A location that makes the bare necessities harder than they should be. Food, fuel, infrastructure, everything costs more, takes longer, or depends on someone else. You'd think that would be the one thing the Caribbean had in abundance. But it's not. Surface freshwater contaminates easily when you're surrounded by the ocean. Hurricanes make it even worse, flooding supplies and ruining wells. Some islands rely on desalination, but that's expensive and limited. Often they have no choice but to import water. Jamaica, Barbados, the Bahamas, they all depend on outside help just to survive. When a country can't secure its own water, its national security becomes fragile. It's a constant reminder. Geography built paradise and geography built vulnerability. This is one of the biggest nightmares in geopolitics. When you depend on foreign powers to feed yourself, your national security becomes precarious. Only 3 Caribbean countries produce more than half their food domestically: Guyana, Belize, and Haiti. And 2 of those 3 aren't island nations. The islands have to import food. The region as a whole has to import between 80 and 90% of its total food supply. And it gets worse for the Caribbean. Trinidad and Tobago has it a bit better than many of its neighbors. It has oil and natural gas, almost 55,000 barrels of oil a day. The rest of the Caribbean didn't hit the geological jackpot. Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic have made some inroads in the pharmaceutical market, but the region's exports are mostly the same: fruit, seafood, and flowers. It's not that the Caribbean has nothing of value. Jamaica has bauxite needed to make aluminum, and Cuba has about 30% of the world's nickel reserves. Sounds impressive, but Jamaica's bauxite production in 2024 only amounted to 0.78% of the world's total. Not enough to change its economic portfolio. And Cuba's nickel? The communist regime's mismanagement and the American embargo have affected its value. Once again, the great powers shaped the Caribbean's fate. That leaves one path for Caribbean countries to make money at scale. The one thing they have in abundance: climate and scenic seas. Tourism is the foundation of the Caribbean economy. The region sees 1.26 million tourists every year, primarily from North America and Europe. In Jamaica and the Bahamas, tourism accounts for over a third of GDP. Some nations rely on it far more. Antigua and Barbuda gets 94% of its GDP from tourism. One storm or one economic shock can devastate these economies. The 2020 COVID-19 pandemic offered a stark warning. Tourism to the Caribbean fell by 67%, wiping out $33.9 billion in revenue. That's not just economic vulnerability. That is a geopolitical nightmare. Because when your exports depend on someone else's citizens boarding a plane, you don't fully control your own future. All it takes is one statement, one post on social media from the US State Department advising Americans not to go to the Caribbean, and an entire region's economy collapses. And there are reasons. The region has a high homicide rate, 49.4 per 100,000 in Jamaica, 51.3 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. All valid reasons for the diplomatic offices to call for a pause on tourism to the region. Forming a Caribbean Union might look good on paper, but when your economy depends almost entirely on money from outside powers, you don't have many options. Mostly, you just smile and say yes. This is especially true when sudden disasters strike, and the Caribbean can expect more of them. Just look back at Hurricane Melissa. In Jamaica, the running total for the storm was $10 billion. That's devastating to a country with a total GDP of $33.7 billion in 2024. One storm, one day, and a third of Jamaica's economy was wiped out. And here's the real startling fact. Hurricane Melissa wasn't a surprise. There was no shocking left hook like the American Mid-Atlantic region saw with Sandy in 2012. Jamaica knew that Melissa was coming. The authorities prepared 5 days before impact. Water teams were mobilized. Evacuations began. Airports shut down. And yet there was nothing the authorities could do. The storm rolled in. 102,300 acres were damaged. Crops were devastated. Half of the island's forests were damaged. And the list of losses still grew even after Melissa vanished into thin air over the North Atlantic. Floods hit 2 weeks later, creating another major health emergency. Authorities scrambled to warn people not to come in contact with the contaminated water. Mosquito-borne illnesses surged across the entire Caribbean in the aftermath. On top of that, the long-term healthcare costs for treatment and other complications added a heavy burden to already strained systems. Jamaica was actually better prepared than many of its neighbors. The country had a $150 million catastrophe bond on standby for events like Hurricane Melissa. It also received regional assistance from the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, a multi-country insurance fund with 35 members. It paid Jamaica an additional $71 million in the wake of the storm. While the aid was welcome, the numbers tell the real story. Since its creation in 2007, the CCRIF has paid out $483 million, still less than a tenth of the damages Melissa caused in Jamaica alone. In other words, even when the region pools resources and coordinates, it doesn't have nearly enough capacity to cope with just one major disaster in a single year. And these storms happen in the Caribbean. A lot. On average, the Caribbean can expect 12 tropical storms a year. A typical island will get a storm that sets its GDP back by almost 6% every year. But it gets worse. The storms are becoming more frequent over a long time. Belize's Great Blue Hole is a timestamp of the local climate. Hurricanes hit the Caribbean 12 times every year. Each one costs 6% of GDP. Do the math, so there's really only one choice for Jamaica and its neighbors. They have to rely on outside help for aid. During Maria, Dominica needed to rely on airlifts from the UK, France, and the Netherlands. The damage was so catastrophic that it couldn't import its own supplies. And that highlights the problem. Relying on outsiders for aid is never a good position to be in. It's even worse than relying on their tourists. When the storm hit Jamaica, tens of thousands went hungry almost overnight. Aid arrived, but the country's neighbors, especially the United States, became the lifeline keeping people alive. And if you think that a greater sense of Caribbean brotherhood can help to hedge against these risks, think again. Jamaica's disaster was the Dominican Republic's opportunity. It saw a surge of tourism as 2025 wound down. The authorities there were more worried about managing the flights for the holidays than about their neighbors' devastation. Proof that one country's disaster can be another country's opportunity. There's only so much the Caribbean can do. The region is hopelessly dependent on foreign powers, and now these powers are competing there again. China is rich enough to project influence even here, not through disaster relief, but through surveillance and strategic investments. It's asserting its presence in a region historically shaped by outside interests. In 2023, the Wall Street Journal broke the news. Cuba agreed to host a new Chinese spy base near Havana, the perfect location to gather up data from the southeastern United States. The government's response at the time was largely to point to the past. The spy activity had already been ongoing for years. There were calls for the Cuban government to shut down the Chinese operations. It highlighted how powerful countries always have options and can project influence even in the Caribbean. Cuba's economy has long been on life support, and now its energy supply is under threat amid ongoing foreign influence. At the same time, European powers are quietly pushing to establish stronger ties in the Caribbean. France still governs several Caribbean territories, including Martinique and Guadeloupe. In September of 2025, France used these territories as the base for a new push. It plans to strengthen its relationship with the English-speaking Caribbean countries nearby, places like Dominica and St. Lucia. For France, it's a way to have some more options near its overseas territories and to reinforce French Guiana. But for the Caribbean itself, it's just another version of the same old story. You can't decide your destiny. Your destiny is decided for you. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack. Deep in the Nevada desert, there's a secret US base, and it's not the one you're thinking of. Eyewitnesses talk about strange projects, restricted zones, and things that were never meant to be seen. But this isn't just about rumors or aliens. Hidden across the planet are bases designed for the worst. Buried nuclear bunkers, intelligence hubs watching entire continents, places meant to survive the end of the world. Welcome to a countdown of the most secret and infamous military bases on Earth. Starting us off with number 50, a 15 megaton blast. That's what Cheyenne Mountain Complex was built to survive. Located in Colorado, it's not just a base. It's a city carved into solid granite. There are over 5 acres of tunnel space, 15 three-story buildings on 1,300 giant springs to withstand the shockwave of a direct nuclear hit. It used to be the nerve center of North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD. If war broke out, this was where America watched the missiles rain down. But today, most of it's empty. The complex is still there, it's just not essential anymore. But protecting a nation takes more than one bunker. Number 49. If Washington disappears behind a mushroom cloud, the US government doesn't. Raven Rock is a backup underground Pentagon designed to take over if the real one is ever destroyed. It's got its own power, water, food, and communications center, everything needed to keep the country running. It's only been used once. After the 9/11 attacks, then Vice President Dick Cheney was taken there. Raven Rock has room for 3,000 officials to help the country function after a nuclear catastrophe. And it's not the only contingency plan. Number 48. 51 miles from Washington, hidden in the Blue Ridge Mountains, is a place the government never talks about. Mount Weather seems innocuous enough. FEMA offices, quiet roads. But underground is a 600,000 square foot bunker built to house the president and their administration during a national disaster. It's also where the U.S. stores national treasures. If Mount Weather ever becomes active, it means we're in trouble. And while these bunkers were built to survive the unthinkable, the next base exists to create it. Number 47. Everything secret that flies gets built here. Plant 42 near Palmdale, California, is where America's most advanced aircraft are assembled. The SR-71 Blackbird, the F-117 Nighthawk, the B-2 Spirit, all began life here. Today, it's working on the F-22 and F-35, and the next-gen B-21 Raider. Rollouts are public affairs, but what happens inside the hangars stays classified. This is where black projects become deadly weapons. And once those weapons exist, someone has to figure out how they work. Number 46. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is where captured technology goes to be taken apart. The base has been reverse engineering enemy hardware since World War I. Nazi rockets, Cold War aircraft, and a whole lot more. Some of it ends up in a museum. Most of it doesn't, though. And there's the rumor that never dies. Debris from the Roswell crash was taken here, not to Nevada. When answers stay classified long enough, rumors take over. Number 45. This base is the inspiration for Stranger Things. Camp Hero sits on Long Island, surrounded by millions of civilians. An unusual place for a Cold War radar station. Unofficially, contractors confirmed underground tunnels. And in 1992, a former technician claimed the base ran human experiments involving mind control, telekinesis and teleportation, and time manipulation. The military denies it all. The base closed in 1982, but something strange washed ashore in 2008, the Montauk Monster. Up to this point, secrecy has been about technology. From here on, it becomes about control. Number 44. Located in the Alaskan wilderness, 180 antennas penetrate high into the atmosphere. HAARP was built to study the ionosphere. Officially, it's a research center. Unofficially, it's a key point of conspiracy culture. Weather control, earthquakes, mind manipulation, even moon zapping, which actually happened. But it wasn't to affect tidal patterns, it was for lunar soil analysis. The military gave the base to the University of Alaska in 2015, which should have ended the out there theories. Except there's another base doing similar work, much more covertly. Number 43. Pituffik Space Base. This base controls the top of the world. Formerly known as Thule Air Base, Pituffik Space Base sits deep inside Greenland, above the Arctic Circle. Its radar and command systems track aircraft, missiles, and satellites moving between continents. Its 3,000-foot-long runway can handle the largest military aircraft in existence, providing the shortest path between North America and Europe. And most people don't even notice. And that's exactly how the Pentagon likes it. And this kind of global awareness only matters if you know what it was meant to stop. Number 42. Kwajalein Atoll, deep in the Pacific, is one of the most remote U.S. military installations on Earth. And that's the point. It's where Uncle Sam tests missile defense systems and tracks objects in space, including debris smaller than a baseball. The Space Fence radar that can follow thousands of objects in orbit at once. Some tests don't even get publicly acknowledged. It's shrouded in secrecy, but it's not completely off limits. SpaceX launched its first Falcon 1 rocket there. When something explodes in the sky, Kwajalein is usually watching. So far, we've seen bases built to survive nuclear war, control the skies, and hide weapons where no one can reach them. And from here on, locations only get more strategic and more controversial. And some bases don't watch the sky. They exist purely because of where they sit. Number 41. It would be the perfect tourist spot if it wasn't one of the U.S. military's most important bases. Diego Garcia sits in the middle of the Indian Ocean, perfectly positioned to reach the Middle East, South Asia, and East Africa. Bombers, submarines, supply ships all rotate through here. Nothing happens without authorization, and no civilians are allowed within 3 nautical miles. The original population was forcibly removed to make it happen. The international backlash never really went away. And if you like these deep dives, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I've already said too much, and my browser history looks like a declassified document. What all these bases have in common isn't secrecy, it's reach. Number 40. In 2022, France spent millions upgrading Chalet Naval Base in Noumea, New Caledonia, adding a new 130-meter docking bay and plans to station patrol ships in the Pacific. These ships can operate for 30 days without resupply. They're equipped with several drone swarms for surveillance. France hasn't carried out a major naval mission here since the 1960s, and now it's back. With China pushing deeper into the region, this base isn't symbolic. It's a warning, but not every threat comes from fleets or aircraft. Number 39. Plum Island started as a military fort, then became an anti-submarine base, and then turned into the Plum Island Animal Disease Center. Its official mission? Prevent animal-based epidemics. Unofficially, it's known as Lab 527. People argue the line between studying diseases and weaponizing them is pretty thin, and secrecy didn't help public trust after 2020's pandemic. The Department of Homeland Security runs it now, and what happens here stays here. Elsewhere, secrecy can be driven by weapons rather than disease. Number 38. North Korea hides its nuclear weapons where enemies can't strike them. Sinpongdong is buried near the Chinese border. Its entrances are disguised by thick vegetation, but satellites have revealed missile storage tunnels and underground facilities, hiding Hwasong-15 or 18 missiles. Why here? Hit it and you risk fallout drifting into China. Not a great idea. Construction began in 2004. It's been operating since 2014. The world only found out about it recently. At this point, secrecy stops being defensive. It becomes a weapon in and of itself. Some nations have decided the safest place to hide power is underwater, though. Number 37. Yulin Naval Base is China's underwater nuclear shield. Situated on Hainan Island, it houses China's nuclear submarine fleet. Massive tunnels carved into mountains let subs enter and exit unseen. The US found out the hard way. In 2001, a spy plane monitoring Yulin collided with a Chinese fighter and was forced to make an emergency landing. Today, next-gen Type 95 and 96 nuclear submarines are believed to operate from here, and they're all armed with ballistic missiles capable of hitting the continental US. But this isn't the only base designed to stay out of sight. Number 36. Analysts discovered a massive circular antenna array in Kaliningrad, near a Baltic Fleet airbase. It's designed to intercept NATO communications across the region. Construction began in March of 2023, with no public announcement from Moscow. With Finland and Sweden joining NATO, Russia's western borders suddenly became problematic, but from here the Kremlin can listen in, harder than ever. Listening in is only one way to prepare for conflict. Number 35. Russia's version of Area 51 isn't about aliens, but that doesn't mean the Pentagon isn't scared. Officially known as Kapustin Yar, the site has tested missiles since the Cold War. Sputnik's tech was developed here. Today, it's where Russia tests its latest air defense systems like the S-500, hypersonic weapons, and satellite killers. Conspiracy theorists also believe alien research goes on, deep underground. In 2024, the base was the target of Ukrainian drone strikes. That alone tells you how important it is. Some operations aren't about testing, though. They're about acting. Number 34. This base enables drone strikes outside publicly acknowledged battlefields. Hidden in Saudi Arabia, Logistics Support Area Jenkins is a joint CIA-Saudi facility used to strike Yemen. Despite American troops pulling out in 2003, the base expanded. In 2022, with new ammunition depots, sea missiles, and housing for troops. $3 million in supplies have arrived since early 2024. This isn't preparation for war, this is war, without the official declaration. And China is also making its own moves, far beyond its own borders. Number 33. China officially claims to have only one overseas base. Evidence suggests otherwise. China built an exclusive facility in Cambodia, Ream Naval Base. The location matters. Perched on the Gulf of Thailand, it means China can bypass choke points like the Strait of Malacca. It's quiet, small, but it changes the balance of power in Southeast Asia. In some countries, secrecy is built directly into the ground. Number 32. Deep under Tel Aviv, there are secret bases. Site 81 sits beneath one of the busiest parts of the city. You would have never known about it until one of its entrances was revealed online. Nearby is another underground facility, nicknamed the Fortress of Zion, located underneath the Kirya, an urban military base. Analysis suggests tunnel connections between them. Iran seemed to think so. A missile strike in 2024 damaged buildings directly above one of these sites. They weren't targeting civilians. They were aiming for Israel's hidden command network. Up to this point, you've seen how major powers prepare for war at the highest level. Underground cities, global surveillance, and hardened command centers. But now the focus shifts to how those plans are tested, enforced, and how they reach beyond borders. Number 31. The US never really left Syria. The official line is that troops withdrew in 2019. The reality is different. At least 9 bases are scattered across northeastern Syria, including Rumaylan landing zone. Some guard oil and gas fields, others line critical supply routes, blocking Iran's access to the Mediterranean. These bases have been slowly expanding, all without Syrian government permission. Meanwhile, entirely different kinds of weapons are being tested in black sites. Number 30. This is China's Area 51. Lopnor pretty much appeared overnight near a nuclear test site. It's got a 3-mile-long runway, and massive upgrades began in 2021. Then, a leaked photograph got the world's attention. A reusable, winged spacecraft landing on the runway. Likely China's version of the US Air Force's X-37. Hypersonic drones are believed to be tested here too. Whatever's at the cutting edge of Xi Jinping's military plans, it's probably tested here. And China isn't alone. Russia has been preparing for this kind of future for decades. Number 29. Russia built a city inside a mountain. Mount Yamantau has been under construction for 50 years. The Soviet Union might have stopped, but the digging kept going. Western intelligence agencies believe it's one of the largest underground complexes in the world. Experts believe it could house up to 60,000 people. It's self-contained and prepped for nuclear war. It's also been claimed that it's linked to Russia's Dead Hand, the system that can launch a nuclear retaliation even if Russia's leadership is wiped out. Putin was supposedly hiding out here a month after the special military operation began in Ukraine. From this point on, the bases aren't contingency plans. They're where world leaders expect to end up. China is also looking west, toward terrain few armies train in. Number 28. After signing a security agreement signed in 2016, China started to expand a former Soviet base near Kumarg in Tajikistan. The official reason? Border security. China got spooked when the Taliban took over Afghanistan. The real reason? The high altitude and terrain. Sitting at 13,000 feet, the base is perfect for mountain warfare training. Handy if things ever get serious with India again. Some sites only become public by accident. Number 27. People only know about Yasny missile base because Russia leaked it. Officially, it's one of the nation's official ICBM launch sites. Unofficially, it's got a whole lot bigger. In 2019, blueprints surfaced after contractors dropped sensitive files online. The base is believed to test Russia's newest nuclear delivery systems, including hypersonic weapons. The Kremlin's reach extends well beyond its own borders, too. Number 26. This is the base that kept a Russian presence in the Middle East. Built in 2015 near Latakia, Khmeimim allowed Russia to create a de facto no-fly zone in Syria. Fighters, bombers, air defenses, and spy planes all operated from here. If it disappeared, so would most of Russia's influence in the eastern Mediterranean. After Assad flew to Moscow in late 2024, the base's future looked uncertain. But Russia secured a long-term lease with the option for another 25 years. As long as Khmeimim exists, Russia remains a power in the region. And it's not the only nation watching the region closely and positioning itself. Number 25. There have been rumors that China has a base in the United Arab Emirates. In 2021, U.S. intelligence warned that Beijing was secretly building a military facility at Khalifa Port in Abu Dhabi. Washington protested, and construction appeared to stop. Then, it quickly resumed. A Chinese logistics base in the UAE would place Beijing next to critical oil shipping lanes and directly beside major U.S. surveillance operations. It wouldn't need troops, just access. But control in the Middle East also depends on seeing everything that moves. Number 24. Al Dhafra Air Base is America's eye in the Middle East. It's home to U-2 spy planes, Global Hawk drones, and AWACS aircraft, the planes behind almost every U.S. air operation in the region. Over half of all Global Hawk sorties worldwide launch from here. The UAE and French air forces use it too. So this isn't just a hub for American power. No wonder China wants to have a presence nearby. So far, the bases have shaped conflicts without ever being acknowledged. Now, this is where wars can be decided before a single shot is fired. Number 23. Google Earth caught this one by accident. Near Qingdao, images revealed a new and improved submarine base. Submarine Base Number 1. Its position isn't random. It puts Chinese subs within striking distance of Taiwan and Japan. And this is critical at a time when tensions are rising. Surface fleets get noticed, submarines don't, and that's the whole purpose of this base. Sometimes training for war, though, requires entire cities be built for it. Number 22. China practices invasions at Zhurihe Training Base. It's China's biggest military base, over 386 square miles. Behind its walls is a replica of downtown Taipei, including the presidential palace. There's also a dedicated Blue Force, units trained to fight like NATO. The purpose is obvious, but who's training there and how often remains classified. Unlike Zhurihe Training Base, some installations officially don't exist. Number 21. America denies this base exists. Site 512 is located in Israel's Negev desert, 20 miles from Gaza, 5 from the Egyptian border. Its purpose is to detect Iranian missiles and drones. It's one of the reasons Israel is so effective at intercepting incoming attacks. Uncle Sam still denies operating a base there, but it has expanded to support over 1,000 troops. The Pentagon is dropping tens of millions of dollars for a non-existent building in the desert. Number 20, a Russian search engine revealed this secret base. In 2018, Yandex Maps published detailed images of Camp Glilot near Tel Aviv, the headquarters of Unit 8200, Israel's Fidelity Intelligence and Cyber Warfare Unit. The digital attack on Iran's nuclear program in 2025 almost certainly passed through here. Digital warfare is one thing. China is preparing for something far larger, though. Number 19. This might be the largest command center ever built. Satellite images from 2025 showed a massive complex under construction 20 miles southwest of Beijing. And it's potentially 10 times the size of the Pentagon. There's no troops, no obvious markings, and details are sketchy, but analysts believe it's a hardened wartime command center, with deep underground bunkers designed to withstand a nuclear attack. The next nuclear deterrent doesn't just soar, it hides. Number 18. Everyone knows Israel has nuclear weapons. Israel doesn't even say no, only maybe. It also says maybe to this base in the center of the country. Satellite images show dozens of caves at Stomicha, believed to house Jericho 2 and 3 ballistic missiles. These weapons are capable of carrying nuclear warheads across the Middle East. Arrow 3 missile defense systems also operate here. That means Israel can strike and survive any retaliation. Sometimes, though, secrecy isn't enough. Number 17. In 2023, Iran revealed Ogab 44, an underground airbase cut into solid rock. It has hangars for fighters, drones, bombers, fuel and ammo dumps, all protected from airstrikes. Iran claims it can survive attacks from US bombers. Whether that's true or not, who knows? Iran probably has more of these bases, but this is the one it wanted the world to know about. And in the modern age, intelligence can matter more than firepower. Number 16. RAF Menwith Hill in northern England is one of the largest signals intelligence stations on Earth. 37 huge golf balls spy on the planet. Each one contains antennas that intercept satellite, military, and civilian communications from all across the globe. Edward Snowden's leaks confirmed it plays a role in drone strikes and battlefield intelligence. The site also played a role in slowing Putin's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The UK isn't the only nation listening in. Number 15. Pine Gap in the Australian outback sees everything. It intercepts communications and feeds intelligence directly into US and allied military operations. But locals have a different opinion on the ever-expanding facility. Some say it's a target for nuclear weapons. Others say it's a spy base. Edward Snowden's leaks in 2013 confirmed that it's been used in intercepting global communications. Some secrets are buried in places no one expects. Number 14. Britain dug a secret base in Gibraltar without telling Spain. In the 1970s, the UK carved an underground intelligence facility deep into the Rock of Gibraltar, revealed only in a 2023 report. Spain, now a NATO ally, was never informed. Some restricted zones still exist today, which might suggest the base does too. Britain has also crossed ethical lines in the past, all in the name of security. Number 13. Porton Down in Wiltshire wasn't where Britain planned for war. It's where it tested its weapons on British citizens. Between 1945 and 1989, over 3,000 service members were exposed to nerve agents during experiments. At least one died. The research wasn't useless, though. It helped identify Novichok after Russia poisonings in 2018. The next site, though, is so shrouded in mystery, it doesn't even appear online. Number 12. This place doesn't even show up on Google Maps. Volkel Air Base in the Netherlands is one of the only 3 locations that doesn't show up on the site. U.S. nuclear weapons, B-61 nuclear bombs, are believed to be stored there. In 2025, unidentified drones were spotted close to the base, shutting down Dutch airspace. There was no official explanation. Russia denied being involved, maybe too quickly. But unlike the Dutch, France doesn't need to blur its deterrence. Number 11. Ile-Longue is the home port of France's nuclear ballistic missile submarines. Warheads and missiles are maintained in underground bunkers inaccessible to civilians. The base is divided into different colored zones, separating daily life from nuclear reality. There's a red zone, where the missiles and warheads get stored and maintained. The blue zone is for normal life. The yellow zone is the docks and harbor. From here on, secrecy stops protecting nations and it starts deciding outcomes. Number 10. RAF Croton handles around 1/3 of the U.S. military's communications in Europe. 25% of the comms from Europe to the United States also pass through here. It's been in service since 1938, so it's had time to expand. Croton isn't just Big Brother watching you. It's Big Brother's Big Brother. And when it comes to testing the future, you need a whole lot of space. Number 9. Woomera Prohibited Area covers 49,000 square miles, about as big as England. It's the largest land-based test range in the Western world. Hypersonic vehicles, missile systems, drones all get trialed here. There are only a few areas you can go without authorization. You'll need a special permit for everywhere else. Some surveillance sits a little too close to home. Number 8. 90 miles off the coast of Florida, China is lurking. In June of 2023, reports revealed that China had agreed to build a spy base, one that could scoop up data from the southeast US and all its bases. Washington denied the report, then admitted the base already existed, which is worse. When it comes to elite missions, militaries need a place to train, too. Number 7. Harvey Point defense testing activity is where SEAL Team 6 trained for its most famous mission, to find Osama bin Laden. An exact replica of the al-Qaeda leader's compound was built here. The base is shared by the CIA, Special Operations Forces, and intelligence agencies. Airspace restrictions extend to 14,000 feet, and you can understand why. The next site has such an open secret, it features in Hollywood. Number 6. The CIA calls it the farm. Camp Perry was established in 1942, and it trains intelligence officers in surveillance, tradecraft, interrogation resistance, and recruitment. What's taught here? Dead drops, surveillance, interrogation, resisting interrogation, survival, building relationships with marks. Courses last 6 brutal weeks. Most trainees never talk about it. They're not supposed to. But not all facilities rely on hardware. Number 5. Consider it Plum Island for people. The U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases is the military's highest-level bioresearch facility. It's the only DoD lab equipped to study pathogens at biosafety levels 3 and 4. That means anthrax, Ebola, and Rift Valley fever. Officially, it trains people to manage and identify biological threats, and it's also involved in vaccine development. It's supposed to be strictly defensive, but after the 2001 anthrax attacks, suspicion fell on a scientist who worked there. Some sites become legends of their own. Number 4. You already know this one. Just 83 miles from Las Vegas, Area 51 tests advanced aircraft and weapons. Trespassers aren't fined, they're warned that they could be shot. It's illegal to fly over it. The CIA is here alongside the Air Force, and of course, there's the conspiracy theories that are part of the site's lore. Most are untrue. The real secret is how far ahead the tech is. We've reached the top 3, and everything from here on operates on a different level. Number 3. Tolicha Peak Electronic Combat Range doesn't officially exist. It's hidden on Paiute Mesa, 3 miles north of Tolicha Peak, deep within the mountains. It's an outcrop of Nellis Air Force Base and is believed to host electronic warfare and classified flight testing. But of course, conspiracy theorists are interested. UFO sightings spike here for a reason. If it disrupts radar, GPS, or sensors, it's probably tested here first. The next secret base is hiding in plain sight. Number 2. One building in Manhattan is unlike the others. 33 Thomas Street is a gray, concrete, windowless skyscraper. It went up in the 1970s on the site of AT&T's phone hub, and in 2016, it was revealed as a likely NSA surveillance hub, home to the Titan Point program. It sweeps up communications from allies like Japan, Germany, and France. The building isn't even lit at night. It probably doesn't need them. And the last secret base isn't hidden, it's overlooked. Number 1. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency turns satellite images into data. It tells drones and missiles where to go. It's how the US found Osama bin Laden, and in 2025, it opened a new HQ in St. Louis. The city is toying with legislation to designate it a protected zone. Because the best secret isn't the one you hide, it's the one no one thinks to look for. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack. Soon after the US and Israel launched joint military operations against Iran, targeting thousands of locations across the country with relentless bombing runs and missile strikes, the Iranian regime responded. They effectively shut down the Strait of Hormuz, threatening to attack any ship that attempted to pass from one side to the other. And they have since followed through on those threats. By setting several tankers ablaze and laying mines within the water, they turned a once safe passageway into a veritable death trap. As a result, traffic within the strait has declined by a staggering 95%. Only a small fraction of vessels are now allowed to pass through. Oil prices have subsequently surged around the globe. Entire continents are on the edge of a serious economic crisis, and world leaders are scrambling for a solution. On paper, the answer looks pretty easy. The US is the most powerful nation on Earth, taking a top spot in the global firepower military strength rankings every single year. Its naval force is second to none. It boasts a staggering 11 aircraft carriers and hundreds of warships, all backed up by thousands of world-leading aircraft and near-endless supplies of missiles and bombs. A force of such immense size and strength should be able to conquer entire nations with relative ease. So why can't the US just take over the Strait of Hormuz? How hard could it be to control a simple waterway that's a mere 21 miles wide at its narrowest point? Well, for America and its allies, it's much, much harder than it sounds. And the answer is hidden in the geography. Between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman is the Strait of Hormuz. It connects the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean beyond that. Iran is situated to its north, with Oman and the United Arab Emirates to the south. This stretch of water may not look all that important on a map, but sometimes the smallest locations hold the greatest importance. It's one of the most significant passageways on the planet, holding enormous influence over the global economy. That's because it is literally the only way for oil to leave the Persian Gulf by sea. And this is one of the most oil-rich regions on Earth. Many of the countries here rank among the world's largest oil producers, including 5 of the top 10: Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, Iraq, and Kuwait.
Combined, these nations produce close to 30 million barrels of oil every single day. While some of that oil travels to its destinations via pipelines, a large percentage of it has to travel by sea. It must traverse the Strait of Hormuz to reach the many countries that depend on it. A staggering 20% of the world's oil, as well as 20% of its liquefied natural gas, flows through this single waterway each year. Those destination nations can be found all over the world. Millions of barrels head straight to Asia to feed the world's largest manufacturing hubs. In Europe, it powers the electrical grids of major nations. And in Africa, entire countries rely almost exclusively on Gulf state oil just to keep their vehicles running. Even parts of the world that don't directly buy and use oil from the Persian Gulf still feel the effects when the Strait of Hormuz stops functioning as it should. Because when 20% of the world's oil supply gets cut off, the price of oil all over the world goes up. That creates a snowball effect, with a huge range of knock-on consequences for the costs of numerous other goods. When oil gets more expensive, everything becomes more expensive, and almost everyone suffers. This is why the Strait of Hormuz is so incredibly significant. It's more than a simple waterway, it's a vital artery in the global economy. Some argue that the most obvious solution is to send in the US Navy to take control. They could remove the mines, deter further Iranian aggression, and escort tankers safely across the strait. It seems entirely plausible. The US Navy boasts almost a dozen aircraft carrier strike groups. It possesses some of the finest warships and destroyers ever constructed, with a military budget larger than dozens of other nations combined. It is stronger than Iran in every measurable metric. As US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth told reporters recently, quote, "We have capabilities that no other nation on Earth has. If Iran does anything to stop the flow of oil within the Strait of Hormuz, they will be hit by the United States of America 20 times harder." End quote. Hegseth and other US officials boast about the enormous impact of their recent strikes on Iran. Billions of dollars worth of American bombs and missiles reportedly laid waste to the country's military infrastructure, leaving the Iranian regime with almost no navy or air force to speak of. It seems completely feasible that the US could move its world-leading warships or state-of-the-art submarines into the waters surrounding the Strait of Hormuz. They could establish control and provide safe passage for the tankers that desperately need to travel through it. Headlines and news reports constantly focus on the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is extremely narrow. It's a mere 21 miles wide at some points, but the actual shipping lanes passing through it are much, much tighter. There are only 2 main lanes that vast oil tankers are legally allowed to follow to get in and out of the strait. One takes them from the Gulf of Oman into the Persian Gulf. Another leads back out the other way. These lanes are a mere 2 miles wide, with another 2-mile buffer gap separating them from each other, and ships are heavily channeled through these paths. These strict routes are of paramount importance for controlling traffic in such a tight space. They prevent potentially catastrophic incidents, like 2 massive tankers violently colliding. When the Strait of Hormuz is working as it should, tankers and cargo ships follow highly predictable, rigid paths in and out of the area. And these are not agile, fast-moving military ships. Oil tankers are colossal. The largest units are technically classified as ultra-large crude carriers. They typically measure more than 1,000 feet in length. They are capable of carrying millions of barrels of oil at a time. Their enormous size and weight make them extremely slow and clunky. They often travel at speeds as low as 12 miles an hour when traversing restricted spaces like the Strait of Hormuz. They are gigantic, unarmored vessels moving at snail-like speeds trapped along clearly defined pathways. That makes them incredibly easy targets for any enemy force planning to ambush them, especially an enemy force possessing many miles of elevated coastline, looking right out over those exact, predictable pathways. You'd expect such a vital artery to be under the strict control of an international authority. an authority that carefully controls the narrow shipping lanes, oversees traffic, and ensures the strait remains a place of peace and safety. That is simply not the case. From a legal perspective, the strait falls under international law. It's covered by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This states that all ships and aircraft enjoy the right of transit passage, which shall not be impeded, and that states bordering straits shall not hamper transit passage. The convention theoretically allows ships from any nation to travel through this waterway without being disrupted or interfered with. The problem is that even though the passageway is ostensibly protected by international law, the waters on either side of it are owned and controlled by Iran and Oman. That gives those countries a huge amount of leverage and influence over the strait's operations, especially Iran. They possess dozens of miles of coastal areas and several small islands dotted along the northern edge of the strait. These vantage points look directly out over the waters, offering clear, unobstructed views of the dozens of defenseless oil tankers traversing the area each day. Even though Iran doesn't officially own the strait, it is in the absolute best possible position to control it. And in recent weeks, Iran has taken full, devastating advantage of that fact. The US and Israel may have decimated Iran's air defenses and missile launch systems. They have not wiped out Iran's ability to defend itself entirely. Reports show that Tehran still stockpiles missiles, drones, artillery, and other weapons. They could use these to conduct devastating strikes on vessels attempting to sail through the Strait of Hormuz. And this leads to the next big issue with military intervention. It would be almost impossible for the US, even with advanced warships, to truly guarantee protection for the vessels using the strait. If Iran wanted to attack those ships, it could use a wide range of short-range weapons. Rockets, short-range missiles, and mobile artillery systems stationed along the coastal areas could do colossal damage. These are not the long-range munitions Iran has used to strike US bases across the Persian Gulf. Those weapons take several minutes or even hours to travel hundreds of miles. That delay matters. It gives the defending force ample time to identify the coming threat. They can evacuate bases or launch interceptor missiles to limit the damage. Any targets of Iran's short-range weapons do not have that luxury. When launched from such close distances, these weapons cross the water in a matter of seconds. They strike their targets in the blink of an eye. This leaves the crew with almost zero time to figure out what is happening, let alone react to it. As retired US Army Colonel David DeRoches notes, you have to detect, identify, track, and then intercept a missile, and it goes very, very fast. Even if American warships were actively escorting a tanker across the strait, they would violently struggle to counteract an unexpected salvo of Iranian missiles or artillery fire erupting from the coast. Now, multiply this nightmare by 100. The US wouldn't just have a handful of tankers to defend. As the world's most important oil trade choke point, the Strait of Hormuz gets intensely busy. Over 100 vessels pass through it every single day. These are not military vessels equipped with air defenses, surveillance systems, turrets, and chain guns. They are simple transport ships designed for one thing: to transport oil or other goods from one place to another. They have zero means of defending themselves and rely on a couple dozen unarmed crew members on board. Thousands of lives are put at risk every day as these vast vessels attempt to get from one side of the strait to the other. Having to protect that many people, escort that many slow-moving tankers, and deal with that many simultaneous threats would be a Herculean undertaking. It would stretch the United States and any answering allies to their breaking point. And that's without even mentioning one of Iran's most efficient and cost-effective weapons: drones. Recent years have seen Iran emerge as one of the top military drone-producing nations on Earth. Its Shahed drones saw extensive use by Russia in the Russia-Ukraine war. These drones are remarkably cheap to make. A typical Shahed 136 is valued at roughly $20,000 to $50,000 per unit. That is a mere fraction of the cost of the million-dollar interceptor missiles often used by the US Navy to take them out. This brutal economic math means Iran can mass-produce them in vast quantities. They launch massive swarms solely to saturate enemy air defenses and deal serious damage. While technical specifications vary across models, many of these drones carry sizable warheads, some in excess of 100 pounds, traveling at speeds around 115 miles an hour. But the most concerning thing about them is their range. Iran's drones can travel an estimated 1,555 miles. They could theoretically be launched from anywhere inside Iran's borders and be used to target civilian ships in the Strait of Hormuz. US defenders could take out large numbers of these drones, but it only takes a couple of them slipping through the net to deal colossal damage. Hundreds of millions of dollars of oil could go up in flames. Entire unarmored tankers could be sent sinking down to the depths of the strait. There's an even deadlier threat, though. US officials frequently boast how America's airstrikes have left Iran without almost any naval force to speak of. But in reality, Tehran still commands lethal water-based assets. Those include mine-laying ships, small fast attack boats, mini-submarines, and even maritime kamikaze drones. All of these systems could be used to cause chaos in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran could use swarms of small boats to overwhelm a ship's physical defenses or blow holes directly in the sides of slow-moving oil tankers. Even if these tankers had US warships escorting them or aircraft carrier groups patrolling the area, they still wouldn't be totally assured of making it through the strait without being violently attacked. Iran doesn't need to defeat the US in a one-on-one, pound-for-pound conflict. It doesn't need an enormous army, thousands of complex missile launchers, vast warships, or other big, bold assets. It only needs to make the strait a dangerous and risky place to travel through. It can do that with a relatively cheap, basic array of tools that it still has in abundance. Artillery and anti-ship missiles fired from nearby coastal positions with almost zero warning. Radars tracking vessels moving through tight shipping lanes. Mobile units and mass drone swarms just waiting to be unleashed. Much of the terrain along Iran's southern coast is intensely rugged and mountainous. The Iranian military knows the area intimately. With home field advantage on their side, mobile ground units take up strategic positions hidden deep among the mountains and valleys. They launch cheap munitions before quickly moving to new locations. Even with jets and helicopters in the air, the US Air Force struggles to pinpoint these guerrilla teams, especially while contending with simultaneous threats from air and sea. At that point, it doesn't actually matter how much muscle the US flexes. Tankers still won't want to travel through the strait. They'll remain exposed to drones on the horizon, artillery hiding behind the coastal cliffs, or deadly mines hidden beneath the water's surface. The companies that own and operate these boats will not want to take any risk of losing them. And the insurance firms that usually cover those companies won't be willing to do so. Which leads to the ultimate paradox of the strait. Technically speaking, it's not mines, missiles, or physical threats keeping oil tankers stuck on one side of the strait or the other. It's insurance. Or, to be more exact, the lack of it. Soon after the war began, all of the big insurance companies that historically provided coverage for tankers rapidly scaled down their offerings. Many simply refused to cover any vessel that intends to traverse the Strait of Hormuz. This is exactly why any idea of the US taking over the strait is a catastrophic catch-22. The goal of taking over the strait is to keep it open and allow oil to flow through. But the act of taking it over inevitably forces it to shut down. The very presence of American military vessels in that part of the world causes extreme commercial jeopardy. There would always be at least some sliver of threat deterring insurance companies from offering the necessary coverage. Without insurance, the giant shipping companies will not sail, leaving only one apocalyptic option. The only way to truly secure the strait would be for the US to completely wipe out Iran's ability to threaten it. It would have to wipe out the majority of its missile systems, and then it must systematically destroy every single one of the rest. It would have to eliminate the entire drone army. It must level all the production plants where those drones are made. It requires disarming millions of underwater mines and completely neutralizing all naval bases. It means eliminating every single military asset that could be used to attack the Strait of Hormuz. It requires severing the complex supply lines allowing Iran's allies like Russia to provide additional munitions in the future. The US would have to completely nullify the military capacities of a country of more than 90 million people, a deeply entrenched regime that has been preparing for a conflict of exactly this kind for several decades. The US has been dominant in its war with Iran, taking out thousands of targets. But there is a huge difference between damaging a large part of a country's military and completely annihilating its entire ability to defend itself. Even for the world's most powerful military, a mission like this demands a superhuman effort. It wouldn't be a 4-week operation. It wouldn't take a couple of months. It would take years of sustained, brutal combat and unfathomable amounts of money. During all that time, the global economy would severely suffer. Oil prices would violently rise, triggering widespread inflation in many markets. Everyday people would be forced to pay exorbitant amounts for everything from the gas in their cars to their utility bills, groceries, and basic goods. An operation of this devastating size and scale involves US lives being put on the line day in and day out. Some have already been lost. More would inevitably follow. Even if the US and Israel successfully took out large amounts of Iranian soldiers and military targets, relatively mild US losses would be too much to bear for large parts of the population and the politicians elected to represent them. This leads directly to rising domestic dissent and severe political disruption back home on American soil. It fractures the US's relationships with its allies in Europe and elsewhere. Its desperate military actions would continue to keep the strait in a massive stranglehold. It worsens the global crisis with every passing day, affecting nations, continents, and billions of innocent people. This is the terrifying paradox of the Strait of Hormuz. The more forcefully a superpower tries to control it, the less stable it actually becomes. In this part of the world, true stability isn't about total military dominance. It's about restraint. It's about deterrence. It is about maintaining a remarkably delicate balance in a very small, fragile, yet extraordinarily influential location. A place that, by its very nature, cannot ever be completely controlled. Which forces an entirely new question. If the greatest military on Earth can't secure this tiny waterway, why don't shipping companies just go around it? The answer is a catastrophic geographical and economic nightmare. And you can see exactly why we can't just bypass the Strait of Hormuz by clicking the video on your screen right now.
It's the smaller economy, the junior partner, the country that sends 3/4 of its exports south across a single border. When President Trump threatened 35% tariffs, everyone assumed Canada would come running. Instead, Canada pivoted, selling oil to China, gold to the UK, striking deals with nations the US barely noticed. So, does Canada actually need the US? Every day, the US and Canada move billions of dollars in goods. $3.6 billion to be exact. It's millions of jobs on the line. Almost 76% of Canada's exports cross the border. In other words, most Canadian exporters don't just like the US market,
They depend on it. A large share of trade between the US and Canada is still moving without tariffs. The disagreement isn't about whether trade continues, it's about how much of it is truly protected. That protection comes from the CUSMA, the trade deal linking Canada, the US, and Mexico. But not every product qualifies. Some goods fall through the cracks. And then there are the strategic exceptions, critical minerals and energy. Those face much lower tariffs of 10%. Why? Because when it comes to the resources that power American industry, the US may need Canada more than it lets on. But as the shadow of tariffs loomed, Canada didn't wait. It moved fast to diversify its trade. At the end of 2024, nearly 76% of Canada's exports were headed to the US. By January of 2026, that number had fallen below 68%. So where did all the trade go? And why does it matter? Exports to non-US nations jumped 15.6%, a record high. Canada basically told the US, thanks, but we've got other friends now. It's not just about trade tariffs. There's something else the US can't afford to lose: Canadian oil. Canada is one of the world's biggest holders of proven crude reserves, almost 10% of the world's entire supply. The only countries that have a bigger share are Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. Sure, the US has its own reserves, but they're tiny compared to Canada's. And with a population over 8 times larger, demand far outstrips domestic supply. But there's a bigger problem. US refineries aren't built for American crude. Not all oil is the same, and much of what the US produces can't be processed the way its refineries are designed. In the 1970s, lighter crude supplies became harder to find globally, so US refineries began investing heavily in the equipment needed to handle heavier, dirtier crude. This wasn't about preference. It was about what was available on the world market and what could keep US refineries running at full capacity. Then came 2005, the shale revolution. New technology that unlocked light oil changed everything. But the US refineries were built for heavy oil. Suddenly, all that new light crude wasn't as useful as you might think. So the US made a choice: export its newly tapped light oil overseas and keep refining heavy oil, much of it imported from Canada. Rebuilding the entire US refining system to process light crude would be extremely costly and time-consuming, something the US couldn't afford if it wanted to keep fuel flowing. If Canada decides to take its exports elsewhere, the US is in trouble. It's left with 2 options: import from big heavy oil producers like Russia and Venezuela, which until recently was politically unfeasible, or have oil companies spend an astronomical amount to alter their entire refinery system. Even if this investment could be made, there's yet another problem. US refiners just don't want to do it. As Reuters discovered, US refiners are already facing decreased demand thanks to electric vehicles and international competition. The last thing anyone wants to do is spend billions of dollars in response to political threats and actions that could change a year from now. Experts predict US oil output will plateau by the end of the 2020s, so refineries don't have much incentive to make expensive long-term investments like that. Which may be why, even today, Canada is the #1 foreign supplier of energy to the United States, to the tune of making up 60% of US oil imports annually. Cutting off this energy supply would be disastrous to the US in the short term. When it comes to energy, the truth is clear. The US needs Canada far more than Canada needs the US. The US population is very much powered by Canada. By January of 2026, as Canada was closing in on a trade deal with China, President Trump escalated, threatening 100% tariffs on Canadian imports. If anything, that move backfired. It only made Canada move faster to reduce its reliance on the US. There are practical difficulties to doing this, of course. Opening up new export markets doesn't happen overnight. Shipping goods across the world isn't like sending them next door. It's slower, it's more expensive, and it's a lot more paperwork. But what does the US have at stake? Canada is the 5th largest producer of natural gas and the 4th largest exporter. That means the moment it redirects those exports, the US feels the impact within weeks. It has leverage over global energy markets that few countries can rival. It's also the fourth largest producer of gold, positioning it to profit enormously as prices hit record highs. In January of 2026, gold surged, with analysts projecting it'll go past $6,000 an ounce by the end of the year. Sure, the US may be in fifth place, but every country fed up with American trade wars knows exactly where to turn. Even after US tariffs were enacted, Canadian exports went up by 2.1%, mostly on the strength of demand for gold, silver, and platinum. But it's not just gold. Canada is sitting on a treasure trove: potash for farming, uranium for energy, platinum for industry, nickel, cobalt, lithium, basically everything your phone, laptop, and electric car rely on. Every country that wants to stay competitive is eyeing Canada right now. The US acts like its economy can handle anything, but many states wouldn't be thriving without Canadian trade. A total of 34 US states rely on the Great White North as their number one export market, particularly those focused on agriculture. Canada and Mexico make up 40% of the market for dairy exports alone. In early 2025, Canadian imports from the US took a hit, dropping by nearly $3 billion. The hardest hit industries: autos, steel and aluminum, electronics, and even agricultural products. US farmers weren't happy, but Canadian farmers might be. Remember that Canada-China trade deal? Well, the two countries came to an agreement. China lowered tariffs on Canadian agricultural products, including canola seed, from around 85% combined to 15%. In return, Canada will open up its market to Chinese electric vehicles, and the two countries will cooperate and co-invest in new tech and green energy. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney expects that lower tariffs will increase export orders for Canadian businesses by $3 billion. Carney also set a goal to increase Canadian exports to China by 50% by 2030. But all this doesn't even touch on a much more existential problem that would occur if the US and Canada severed ties: their mutual defense. If you're still here, I must be doing something right. So make sure to hit like and subscribe to see how the world really works. Canada and the US share the world's largest unmilitarized border, over 5,500 miles. It had never been a problem before. The close US-Canada relationship meant nobody worried about fences or border patrols across the Great Lakes. According to a recent poll conducted by Ledger, nearly a third of Canadians believe that the US will try to invade them. Suddenly, that unsecured border has started to look a bit unsettling. Putting up patrols across miles of dense forests and endless lakes? That wouldn't be easy. But would Canada be isolated without US protection? Not really. Canada isn't alone. It's part of NATO. Any conflict wouldn't just be bilateral, it would ripple outward. There are 32 countries in NATO, including the US, but the United States accounts for roughly 2/3 of the alliance's total defense spending. Its military budget dwarfs everyone else's. That said, the gap is slowly narrowing. Since 2020, US defense spending as a share of its economy has edged down from 3.6% to 3.2%. Meanwhile, the rest of NATO has been ramping up from 1.7% to 2.3%. By 2035, Canada wants to spend $150 billion on defense each year. Could they actually defend themselves without the US? That's the question everyone's asking. Nearly half of everything the world spends on its militaries comes from one country. In 2026, the US military budget stands at roughly $900 billion. It's a terrifying figure for any country that might find itself on the wrong side of a superpower. And Canada has that superpower right on its doorstep. Canada would obviously prefer to have that firepower on its side, but it's hard to imagine the American public backing a war against its own northern neighbor anytime soon. A research company survey found that 66% of Americans would prefer Canada to remain independent. For now, neither side wants to find out what happens when the other stops picking up the phone. The trade wars, the energy disputes, the military flexing, they all matter, but that's just the surface. There's one factor that puts the US in a position it can't afford to ignore. One that makes Canada indispensable in ways people didn't even think. NORAD. Its purpose is to prevent air attacks against North America, safeguard the sovereign airspaces of the United States and Canada, and provide aerospace and maritime warning for North America. With the US not exactly being on a how to make friends and influence people crusade lately, and China quietly building up its military, the need for NORAD has never been higher since the Cold War ended. And where is it needed most? In Canada's Arctic. Being part of NORAD greatly helps Canada as well. Both the US President and Canadian Prime Minister are considered its leaders. They can both issue commands, and it bolsters both nations' securities. As defense analyst Andrea Sharon puts it, the fact that NORAD exists is a deterrent to adversaries. It's telling that NORAD is one of the few international alliances the new US administration hasn't threatened. Even a single statement linking Canada's F-35 purchases to NORAD caused a stir. When U.S. Ambassador Peter Heckstra hinted at it, the State Department quickly backtracked, insisting NORAD's existence was never in question. The message is clear. No matter the trade fights or political tension, some partnerships remain untouchable. That's just how important NORAD seems to be to the United States, and why they might not want to push Canada too much. But why is the Arctic so high on everyone's shopping list? Minerals, shipping lanes, military access, everything intersects here. In May of 2024, the Pentagon invested 8.74 million Canadian dollars in the Nico Cobalt Gold Bismuth Copper project in Canada's Northwest Territories. These rare minerals are the backbone of next-generation military hardware. The Pentagon saw a global supply chain crisis coming, and they started aggressively buying up the physical raw materials to survive it. Canada, wanting to secure its status as an indispensable defense partner to the United States, invested 7.5 million Canadian dollars. It wasn't a standard mining investment. That was a national security bailout. But it's not just about resources, it's also about geography. Russia and China are both turning their attention north. Arctic ice is melting fast, in parts of Canada up to 4 times faster than the global average. As the ice retreats, new shipping lanes open, untapped resources become accessible, and suddenly, the top of the world doesn't look so remote anymore. It looks strategic. Russia isn't sitting still. It's been expanding military bases and resource projects across the Arctic. It already controls roughly half of the land and maritime territory north of the Arctic Circle and dominates much of the region's economic activity. China is closely watching. It's been mapping Canada's Arctic and has openly stated its ambition to one day send cargo ships through the Northwest Passage. And that may not be science fiction for long. Experts predict key Arctic routes could be ice-free during summer months as early as the 2030s. The current U.S. administration has repeatedly expressed their interest in securing Greenland, claiming it's necessary for their security interests. If Canada decides to break their alliance, the U.S. loses access to a large portion of the Arctic. But if the U.S. decides to pull back on defending Canada, they can't help protect the Arctic territories they now deem crucial for U.S. future interests either. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney knows just how critical the Deep North is for Canada and the world. He's launched an unprecedented plan to build mines, ports, highways, and military infrastructure across the Northwest Territories. And when I say sparsely populated, I mean it. The Northwest Territories are about the size of California and Texas combined, yet only 42,000 people live there. Securing a region that vast is no small feat. That's where Carney's plan comes in, a chain of mines, ports, highways, and military installations stretching across the entire Canadian North. It would link remote communities, boost economic development, and strengthen military presence in the region. The plan also reaches Nunavut and Yukon. In November of 2025, the Canadian government unveiled a budget that included 1 billion Canadian dollars spent over the next 4 years on major transportation projects in the North alone. For the first time, regional politicians in the North see that the federal government is paying attention to them. The political will appears to finally be there, and much of it is driven by pressure from the South. U.S. threats and trade tensions have pushed Canada to fast-track its plan to reduce dependence on its neighbor. This isn't about Canada versus the US, but about how modern countries mistake convenience for dependence. Canada and the US severing ties, or more realistically, having a friendship cooldown, would cause big financial and geopolitical headaches for both. But they would be survivable. Imagine the US buying emergency oil from Venezuela's depleted fields just to keep the lights on, while Canadian supply gets rerouted to Beijing instead of Kansas. Canada needs the US market, the US needs Canadian oil, and both need the Arctic not to fall into the wrong hands. That's not really a trade relationship. That's a mutual dependency neither side can afford to admit out loud. If staying friends starts to cost too much, the price of going its own way might suddenly seem worth it.
Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MapPack. One expedition was so catastrophic, it destroyed an entire country's economy and forced two nations to merge. These are the most daring expeditions that leave behind a trail of ambition, betrayal, and fatal mistakes. Starting us off with number 10, the Terra Nova expedition. By the early 20th century, nearly every corner of the globe had been claimed, but the South Pole remained one of the last great prizes. The Terra Nova expedition, led by Robert Scott, the man who had ventured further south than anyone else, set out with 4 companions on what he thought would be the grandest adventure of his life: to be the first to reach the South Pole. The ship departed Littleton, New Zealand, loaded with motor sledges, ponies, dogs, and photographic equipment to record their triumph. By January 4th, 1911, they camped just 15 miles north of Hut Point on Antarctica. It didn't take long for the first warning. One of the sledges was lost to sea ice in just 4 days, but the men took it in stride, staying put for most of the year, a decision that should have raised red flags. Clothing froze, supplies dwindled, and yet on October 24th, they finally set out for the South Pole with no better plans and no warmer gear. By early November, both sledges were abandoned. By December 9th, the ponies were dead, shot out of mercy. Against all odds, Scott made it to the South Pole on January 17th, 1912, only to discover that someone had beaten him to it. But things were about to get worse. And if you want more journeys to the edge of the map, hit that subscribe button. I'm still trying to survive the deadliest frontier of all, YouTube's algorithm. The return journey was a nightmare. Exhaustion, scurvy, and frostbite claimed the men one by one. One fell into a crevice and died 13 days later. Another, crippled by frostbite, walked into a blizzard to spare the others. By March 21st, Scott and the last 2 survivors were trapped in another storm, leaving farewell letters as the world waited in vain. Their bodies weren't found until November. Meanwhile, Roald Amundsen, the man who had beaten them to the pole and returned safely, had traveled light, dressed in furs, and relied on dogs. He treated the expedition like a mission, not an adventure. But at least the Terra Nova team knew they could only rely on themselves. When allies fail, the cost can be deadly. Number 9, the Coppermine expedition. The Northwest Passage was a siren song for explorers for 400 years. Until Amundsen, no one had ever made it. So, the rumors swirled. The Arctic seas didn't just offer a faster way to reach Asia. They might hide lost civilizations, Atlantis, El Dorado, maybe even a gateway to a hollow Earth. It was 1819, and nobody knew. Enter John Franklin. The British government sent 22 men under his command to map Canada's Arctic islands and find a sea route clear of ice. It was ambitious, it was well-funded, and it was underprepared. Without the budget to match, local natives and 2 fur trading companies were supposed to help, but rivalry and miscommunication left aid thin. By August, they set out over 1,700 miles to the Great Slave Lake. The 1820-21 winter with the Yellowknife natives was brutal. When June arrived, the team pushed on along the Coppermine River, reaching the sea for the first time in 2 years. But the Yellowknife guides left, abandoning them at the moment of triumph. Canadian summers are short. The expedition set out in canoes and only managed to scout 500 miles of coastline before the seas became too rough to row back. That meant crossing the barren lands to the lake. Supplies ran low. The cold chilled them to the bone. The men were starving, surviving on whatever they could find, usually decayed carcasses and bone soup. Franklin and his advance group made it back to their shelter on October 12th, only to find it deserted. The Yellowknives had left it a while back, without any food. The orders apparently weren't clear enough. The stragglers seemingly had it better. One of the members presented wolf meat. It was a miraculous find, except it wasn't wolf meat at all. But it did give 2 people enough strength to make it back. Barely. The group survived on lichen fungi and their own boots until the Yellowknives finally came back with supplies on November 7th. Only 8 of the 19 survived the ordeal, and they brought back no news of the Northwest Passage. Franklin's story doesn't end there. More on him later, though. This next story proves that experience doesn't mean much when you're up against nature. Number 8. Percy Fawcett and the Lost City of Z. He'd followed obscure treasure maps through Sri Lanka, survived the deserts of Morocco, and carved paths through uncharted Amazon jungle, facing snakes, piranhas, and slave catchers to settle a border dispute between Bolivia and Brazil. Experts said it would take 2 years. Fawcett did it in months. The Amazon nearly killed him in 1908, and he barely seemed to care. It was safe to say that Percy Fawcett wasn't some reckless amateur. He was one of the most experienced explorers of his era, a member of the Royal Geographical Society, but he had an obsession. He believed in a lost city, not El Dorado. No, this was real, built by civilizations dismissed as primitive, hidden deep in the Amazon. By 1914, he was convinced it lay along the Xingu River in Brazil's Mato Grosso. War intervened. Fawcett served on the Western Front with distinction, even at 50. When it ended, he returned to his obsession. The first attempt failed. The second would not. In 1924, Fawcett set out with his son Jack, Jack's friend Raleigh, and 2 local guides. No excess gear, just the essentials. They made good ground. "You need have no fear of failure," he wrote to his wife. He continued to write until May 29th. 3 days later, Percy Fawcett was last seen alive at Dead Horse Camp. After that, nothing. No bodies, no letters, no trace. Some believe they were killed by bandits. Some even say they settled down in the Amazon. The likeliest answer is that they came upon hostile tribes. The mystery didn't end with them, though. Search parties followed, dozens of them. At least 1 man died trying to solve what happened to Percy Fawcett. The dream of City Z continued to take lives long after Fawcett had gone. When you think of trips that descend into disaster and sheer hell, the next expedition does come to mind as well. Number 7. The Donner Party. The snow fell, and then they ate their dead. Families huddled in frozen cabins. A mother carved meat from a man she'd shared a wagon with for 6 months. Children gnawed on bones. Hunger had stripped humanity from them, leaving one unthinkable choice: eat or die. But this disaster had been set in motion months earlier. In 1846, the Donner Party left Missouri bound for California. 87 people, 80 wagons, and full of hope. They had been promised a shortcut south of the Great Salt Lake. Experienced travelers who left early in the season refused to risk it. One of them, journalist Edwin Bryant, scouted part of the route and knew it was a disaster waiting to happen, but his warnings never reached their intended audience. The Donner Party arrived late in the season. Winter was closing in. The shortcut sounded like salvation. It wasn't. Crossing the desert with heavy wagons turned the shortcut into a delay. Weeks were lost. By October, they reached Truckee Lake in modern California. With one last push, they could make it over the mountains. Soon, they were snowed in. The passes closed overnight. Movement stopped. Supplies vanished. By mid-December, the pack animals were gone, and so was the first member of the party. An advance party was sent out to find help. They found it, but not before resorting to eating the dead along the way. Rescuers arrived on February 19th. They were greeted by figures emerging from the snow. The main camp had already turned to cannibalism. 12 were dead. More would follow. Conditions were too dangerous to take everyone out at once. Survivors had to leave in waves. Even getting food in risked lives. When spring came, only 48 of the original 89 remained. The cold had claimed the Donner Party, but a different kind of extreme awaited men bold enough to cross it. Number 6. The Berkey and Willis Expedition. The Outback is vast and merciless, a land no one could tame. The Australian government dangled a prize, £2,000 for whoever dares to cross it, but this was no ordinary challenge. It was a gamble with death itself. In 1860, a man named Robert O'Hara Berkey stepped forward. He had no exploration experience, but plenty of confidence. The team was well equipped. They left Melbourne to the cheers of 15,000 people. One wagon broke immediately. 2 more failed before they made it out of the city. Progress was slow, and a rival expedition from South Australia was racing toward the same goal. So Berkey made a fateful decision: establish a depot at Cooper Creek, split the party, and push on fast. Guns, ammunition, and lime juice were left behind, but they still took the gong. They marched into the outback in the height of the Australian summer. And as is so often in exploration, survival came from the local indigenous people, who provided food and water. Berkey and his reduced party made it to within 3 miles from the Gulf of Carpentaria. The heat didn't break them. The April monsoon rains did. The animals went first, collapsing from exhaustion or slaughtered for food. On April 10th, they shot their last horse. What followed was a deadly game of near misses. The forward party and the depot teams passed within miles of each other, never meeting, never resupplying. Disease and exhaustion finished the job. By June, only 1 man remained: John King. He only survived thanks to the Yandrawanda people saving him, but he never fully recovered and died 11 years later, aged just 33. If the Australian heat had broken men, the Arctic would destroy them. Number 5. Franklin's Lost Expedition. In 1822, Britain wasn't done looking for the Northwest Passage. By 1845, John Franklin was back, older, confident, and this time sent by sea. London spared no expense. He was given 2 ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, iron-plated, outfitted with all the supplies anyone would ever need. There were stoves to melt ice and make fresh water, state-of-the-art radiators to keep the crew warm, steam engines for auxiliary power, plus 8,000 tin cans of food. Enough, Franklin believed, to last 5 years. He signed the food contract just a month before departure. The expedition set out from Greenhithe in Kent on May 9, 1845, with 134 people on board. A supply ship accompanied them, taking 5 sick men back in July. They were the lucky ones. July 29th was the last time anyone saw Erebus or Terror. What followed had to be pieced together. The ships likely wintered near King William Island and never escaped. The ice closed in and didn't let go. Years later, skeletons began emerging from the permafrost. By the early 1980s, forensic tests revealed the truth. Despite all those supplies, the crew was starving. They were ravaged by scurvy. Archaeologists found the tins and discovered they were poorly sealed. The food had spoiled. Franklin never inspected them. He did, however, find time to pack fine china and a library of over 1,000 books. By April 1848, the ships were abandoned. Franklin was already dead, probably since June the previous year. The survivors marched south into the ice, growing weaker by the day. We don't have to speculate what happened next. In 1992, more bones surfaced, this time with cut marks. It was clear evidence of cannibalism. 2 more big pieces of the puzzle fell into place in 2014. The HMS Erebus was found in 2014 near Queen Maud Gulf. The Terror came to light 2 years later, just south of King William Island. The wrecks showed crews isolated, trapped, watching each other die with no hope of rescue. By the end of 1848, the last man was dead. Franklin wasn't the first to learn that some shortcuts aren't worth the risk. This next story proves survival isn't about bravery or technology. It's about knowing when not to fight nature. Number 4. Magellan's failure. Only one expedition in this list succeeded, and even then, it came with a huge cost. Ferdinand Magellan's goal was simple: find a western route to the Spice Islands, shorter than the route around the Cape of Good Hope. He had 5 ships and 265 men, but cracks appeared immediately. Only 18 would survive. The ships were old, pay was poor, and experienced sailors stayed away. Magellan recruited from across Europe, the Levant, even Africa. Many crews couldn't speak the same language, and command fell to unqualified Spanish nobles hoping to get rich. They sailed from Sevilla on September 20th, 1519, reaching Brazil in 2 months. Then came the real problem: finding a way to the Pacific. Magellan wintered in southern Patagonia from March to August of 1520. Apparently unaware it was summer, hunger and delays broke morale. Mutiny erupted. One ship deserted and another smashed on a reef, taking vital supplies. With 3 ships left, Magellan crossed the strait that would bear his name. Calm seas ended when they reached the Pacific. Supplies ran out. The men ate wormy hardtack, rats, leather, and sawdust. Water was yellow and recycled. Scurvy tore through the crew. They didn't drop anchor until March 6, 1521, in what's now Guam. After resupplying, they reached the Philippines. Magellan didn't leave alive. 40 more men died with him. Another ship's worth of crew gone. 2 ships remained. 1 turned back. 1 ship pressed on, under the command of the Basque navigator Juan Sebastián de Elcano. He made it to the Spice Islands, but then the long way home, around the Cape of Good Hope, hunted by Portuguese ships and starving all the way. 3 years after departure, 18 Europeans and 4 Malays limped back to Spain. The voyage proved the Cape route was still the best option. For all their suffering, at least Magellan's sailors chased something real. Hundreds more suffered because they believed in a total fantasy. Number 3. The Narvaez expedition. Juan Ponce de Leon went to Florida chasing rumors of the Fountain of Youth. But the only thing magical about this expedition was how quickly it turned deadly. The real target was gold. So, naturally, others wanted to follow in the footsteps of the original Florida man. 5 ships and 600 men set out into 1527 under Pánfilo de Narváez, a veteran of the conquests of Cuba and Mexico. The mission was to claim Florida, and a hurricane off Cuba killed 60 men and 20 horses before they even reached Florida. It wasn't until April 12, 1528 that they landed near modern Tampa Bay. They moved north into the wilderness. Narváez's second-in-command suggested they stay with the ships, but Narváez ordered them to sail ahead. 300 men went inland and had nowhere to retreat to under the hail of native arrows. No gold, no fortune, just a lesson not to go chasing rumors. Summer passed as they tried to find the ships. Horses were eaten, supplies ran out. Narváez ordered the construction of 5 barges, 50 men each, to sail to Mexico during hurricane season. The barges leaked, storms scattered them, and Narváez vanished forever. Everything was now in the hands of the second-in-command, Cabeza de Vaca, a man with no exploration experience. He and the remaining survivors were blown clear across the Gulf and crashed on Galveston Island in November. And this is where the real odyssey began. They traveled overland to the Gulf of California, enduring more native attacks and starvation. The dwindling teams were then taken as slaves and somehow made the most of it by building reputations as medicine men. After 8 brutal years, in July of 1536, 4 survivors, including Cabeza de Vaca, made it to Mexico City. Number 2. The Darien Scheme. It all began with a banker's dream and turned into a nation's nightmare. William Peterson helped create the Bank of England, but he got tired of making England rich. He had a bolder idea: a Scottish colony on the Isthmus of Panama. Once it was established, they could control the trade routes, corner the market, and strike gold. Or at least that was the plan. The company to finance the idea launched in 1693, promising an international effort. The English East India Company didn't want competitors, so the Scots went it alone, with little exploration experience. Regardless, investors jumped at the chance. Half of Scotland's available capital poured in, a fifth of the country's total wealth. After years of planning, 5 ships and 1,200 excited settlers made landfall on October 30th, 1698, and the nightmare began immediately. First problem: the land, dubbed Caledonia, was perfect for mosquitoes, not for farming. Second, the settlers were unprepared. They had little food and no knowledge of maize or yams. Third, the land was already claimed by Spain. Relentless attacks by the Spanish and hostile natives made it impossible to trade. And then there was the terrain. It was merciless, and 17th century technology couldn't make trade routes work. The whole plan was doomed from the start. 10 settlers died every day. 8 months later, only 300 remained. But it still gets worse. Word traveled slowly. 2 more relief expeditions set out. Only 1 ship returned. Thousands of lives lost. Scotland's economy was shattered. The Scots had no choice now. Only 7 years later, Scotland and England united to become Great Britain. The Spaniards, meanwhile, were chasing gold, and that obsession led directly to the most delusional and deadliest expedition the world had ever seen. Finally, number 1, Pizarro's quest for El Dorado. By 1541, it was clear the New World was very rich. Surely there had to be a land overflowing with gold, hidden deep in South America. So, Gonzalo Pizarro, younger brother of Francisco the Conquistador, set out from Quito in February with 340 Spanish troops and 4,000 native allies. Their route was a 2,000-mile path along the Coca and Napo rivers. But Pizarro hadn't planned for an expedition this long, or this deadly. The jungle was brutal. The elements were harsh. Mosquitoes feasted, disease spread, supplies dwindled, and arrows rained down from angry natives. After 11 months, over 3,000 men were dead. Survivors ate their horses to stay alive. And still no El Dorado. Something wasn't adding up. In desperation, Pizarro sent his second-in-command, Francisco de Orellana, down another river in search of food with a force of 50 men. It was the day after Christmas, 1541. A month went by. Orellana didn't return. Pizarro, now starving and shoeless, limped back to Quito with the few survivors, vowing revenge. He was convinced Orellana had found El Dorado and kept it secret. And Orellana did succeed, just not in the way Pizarro thought. The currents were strong and swept him and his men along, making them the first Europeans to navigate the entire Amazon River. Native women attacked along the way, fierce as the mythic Amazons, and that's how the river got its name. As for El Dorado, its location remains a mystery. Countless expeditions would follow, chasing a dream that never existed. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack. The alarm bells started ringing in 2019. By 2023, the US had confirmed it. Chinese intelligence operating just 90 miles from Florida. It wasn't breaking news, it was actually common knowledge. And it's all happening next to one of the most critical energy corridors in the United States. China needs the Gulf Coast. Bottled up behind island chains, 80% of its energy runs through choke points it doesn't control. Gas flows from the Gulf to Europe while China watches, vulnerable, helpless. But that doesn't mean it isn't making moves. Every step brings the Gulf Coast closer to a challenge the US may not see coming. And one location begins to stand out: Cuba. Today, the Gulf Coast makes up nearly 20% of the US economy and handles roughly 30% of all US exports. It's home to some of the country's most important ports. Houston, Tampa, Corpus Christi, New Orleans, these ports aren't just busy, they're growing faster than anywhere else in the US. Houston and Corpus Christi alone move 91% of all the crude oil that goes out of the US. And these numbers aren't a coincidence. The Gulf Coast is an energy goldmine. Take a look at this map. Over half of America's oil refining capacity is in the Gulf region. Nearly all of the country's LNG export terminals are on the Gulf Coast. It isn't a region, it's a living, breathing system. Ironically, the Gulf Coast grew because it was perfect for importing oil. But when the shale revolution hit, all that existing infrastructure turned it into the country's main export hub. The US is now the world's largest exporter of natural gas and a net energy exporter overall since 2019. The Gulf Coast is central to America's national security strategy and a potential lever against a China that can't match it. But it's not just about the energy. The Gulf Coast is a hub for American maritime trade. So what happens if the Gulf Coast gets disrupted, say for 30 days? We don't need to imagine too much. Hurricanes show it pretty clearly. When Katrina hit New Orleans, it knocked out 19% of American oil production and threatened 24% of the natural gas supply. 0.86% of the country's GDP was shaved off. Hurricane Harvey slammed into Houston in 2017. Just 1 week of lost production in Texas and Louisiana cost 0.06% of the US economy. Today, 30 days of disruption would be catastrophic. But the Gulf Coast's importance lies beyond the balance sheet. It's about hard power, too. The US military needs those ports and that energy. The fallout would be obvious. Energy exports stop, prices spike worldwide, military supply chains slow, Europe loses a critical supplier. Leverage disappears. This coastline doesn't just power America, it powers the world. And right now, the country that most wants to challenge American power is quietly positioning itself inside it. That's because China imports 70% of its oil and 42% of its natural gas. Much of that passes through choke points it doesn't control. America doesn't have that problem. Trouble in the Strait of Hormuz? The US shrugs. It makes its own energy and relies on Gulf Coast infrastructure instead. Two major domestic choke points it controls make a global disruption a non-issue. It's not just about America being energy independent, it's about America setting global prices. And it's not the only one that benefits. While Europe was once dependent on Russian gas, it now sources 58% of its LNG imports from the US, potentially rising to 80% by 2030. As we've seen, the music stops if only one of them goes wrong. And that is more than an economic problem. That's a strategic disaster. So China has been looking elsewhere. Maybe the American Gulf Coast offers a way out. China has already been investing in farmland in the US, but that's not the only thing it's buying up. China can't threaten the US militarily. At least, not without risking mutual destruction. But it can assert influence in boardrooms, contracts, and infrastructure deals. The Belt and Road Initiative is now reaching US soil. The stakes might be different, but the playbook is the same. China is quietly testing the limits of influence, positioning itself in infrastructure and energy where a crisis could tip the scales. A lot of America's imports use Chinese-made cranes that have questionable security. What if those cranes malfunction and activity in the port stops? One glitch, 1 week of downtime, and the supply chain grinds. And then there's ownership. A Chinese company now controls part of Houston's Bayport terminal, which handles more domestic and foreign cargo than any other US terminal. That's more influence, and that matters when billions of tons of commerce and military supplies flow through these terminals. As well as hardware and weapons, the US military needs 360,000 barrels of oil daily, even in peacetime, just to operate. About half of that passes through Gulf Coast refineries and petroleum terminals, disrupts them, and supply chains stall. Not just for exercises or skirmishes, but for any confrontation with China. The Gulf Coast isn't just infrastructure, it's a key part of America's power projection. And Congress has sounded the alarm on it. The ports are vulnerable.
The sea lift capacity needed for state-based warfare just isn't there, and the energy infrastructure could be vulnerable. And there's worse news for the US. China isn't just trying to get a foothold in the ports, it's moving into the Gulf Coast's energy supply chain. Ironically, one reason the US Gulf Coast became such an energy giant was to supply China's growing demand for energy. By 2017, China was the world's largest oil and natural gas importer. That very year, a slew of Chinese energy companies signed 20 to 25-year contracts with American producers in the region. China might have cut LNG imports from the US in the spring of 2025 over tariffs, but the contracts remained. The gas is still flowing, it's just rerouted to Europe for a profit. Unlike Qatar, which restricts destinations, the US lets Chinese firms sell wherever they want. China can manipulate world energy prices and disrupt American strategy in Europe, all without firing a shot. But China isn't stopping at minority stakes in ports. They want to actually control the extraction process. China's state banks and companies have been particularly interested in the Gulf Coast, and its energy firms are already operating there. CNOOC International had a 21% stake in the Appomattox platform that produces around 90,000 barrels of oil 80 miles southeast of Louisiana. And that's not the only one. It also played a role in the Stampede oil and gas field, 115 miles south of Fortune, Louisiana. These stakes were sold to a British company for $2 billion in December of 2024, but this shows how lax US foreign investment rules can be. It's all part of a counter-strategy because this is the US military's Achilles heel. It might be the world's most advanced and experienced fighting force, but it relies on a lot of fine parts working in harmony. If they don't, the long supply chain gets cut off. Even a limited air operation over Iran becomes a logistical challenge, and against China, that problem multiplies. China's presence in the region and ports provide valuable intelligence. It's a cost-effective strategy to make up for conventional shortcomings. And China's also using its only ally and America's one geographical weakness to try and find a few negotiating chips. China's new base in Cuba wasn't a total surprise to the US intelligence community. Beijing has been active there since 1999, when it set up a spy base at Bejucal, and there are 2 other bases on the island, at Wahai and Calabasar. So Cuba isn't just one base, it's a network, one that's perfect for scooping up signals and monitoring port traffic coming from the Gulf. There's a lot for China to be interested in. Aside from the ports, the US has key bases in the Gulf, including the Special Operations Command Headquarters and the US Southern Command. Concentrating such critical hubs in the region increases vulnerability to attacks that could disrupt operations and readiness. Control, observation, logistics. They all converge in the Gulf region. China's footholds are not coincidences, they're calculated moves in a chess game. And Cuba might have something else to offer China that you might never expect: reverse choke points. The Straits of Florida and the Yucatan Channel aren't Hormuz or Malacca, but they are strategically rare. Shipping traffic from the US Gulf Coast has to go through one of these straits to enter the open ocean. So the spy bases in Cuba aren't just good for monitoring military or industrial signals, they're good for watching every movement of energy and military traffic from the Gulf Coast. Will this be enough to actually block off American commerce? Well, no, but it can disrupt it. Long supply chains, logistics tighten, the US military's resupply network grows even longer, while blockades of Chinese choke points stay effective. This is exactly why the Gulf Coast is such a critical prize. A small disruption here could cascade into a strategic nightmare for the United States. The same nightmare China is counting on as it eyes Taiwan. So what's the federal government doing about this? Not enough. Congress has stalled. States are acting first, prompted by a 2021 federal report. The U.S. Department of Agriculture found 40 million acres of agricultural land owned in part or fully by foreign entities, some near ports, energy terminals, and military bases, raising concerns about control, access, and security around critical infrastructure. So, states have begun to crack down. Since 2021, 50 bills have been passed restricting foreign property ownership. Most target farmland, some specifically target land near critical infrastructure. But even with dozens of laws, gaps remain. No single framework fully shields the Gulf Coast's energy and port facilities. So, in the absence of law, you have to first prepare for the extremes. Miami is combing through Chinese-made cranes with the Coast Guard, checking cybersecurity and operational integrity. The Coast Guard is training for war with China. A war in the first island chain wouldn't stay there. China would try to degrade America's ability to sustain the war through economic and logistical sabotage. The Coast Guard has mapped potential challenges, including how China's equipment and investments could give it critical inside information. So imagine what happens if ports like Port Arthur in Texas experience operational malfunctions. Cranes fail, loading and unloading halt, resupply slows, ammo and critical cargo start running low. And that's just the start. The offshore drilling platforms in the Gulf start failing. Drills stop responding to user controls. Safety switches don't activate. Operators scramble to work with the manual controls, but some of the platforms start to explode. Meanwhile, the ships in the region start reporting GPS malfunctions. The Coast Guard's biggest fear? Collisions in busy lanes like New Orleans. Maritime traffic slows to a crawl or stops entirely. The US military can't be resupplied. Chinese missile strikes devastate US and allied bases in the Pacific. Even the US Navy's blockade of choke points like the Strait of Malacca would be rendered useless. The tyranny of distance begins to win, and the $26 trillion supported by America's maritime system goes haywire. So, the Coast Guard's been making new investments. Drones to monitor places where the ships can't. AI technology flags anomalies before they escalate. A single misbehaving ship on the Mississippi could signal a bigger problem offshore. Early detection becomes the difference between disaster and containment. And to make good on that, the Coast Guard's been cooperating more heavily with US Cyber Command and the Infrastructure Security Agency to safeguard ports, terminals, and pipelines. But the United States won't be able to do it alone. The U.S. Naval Institute issued a stark warning that protecting America's coastal infrastructure requires more manufacturing capacity than the country currently has. The Coast Guard is still more than a decade away from replacing even the aging cutters in its existing fleet. Allies are essential. There's a lot to lose for them, too. Europe relies on US LNG after Russian supplies collapse. Meanwhile, Japan currently gets about 9 to 10% of its LNG from the United States. Allied prosperity depends on keeping Gulf Coast traffic moving. And that's why the best defense might be a good offense. 2026 opened to a surprising development. US forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. But the real loser in the operation was probably Cuba. Venezuela was Cuba's most reliable energy supplier, accounting for over 26,000 barrels of oil a day, or 50% of Cuba's total supply deficit in 2025. When the US blocked those shipments in February of 2026, Cuba faced its worst fuel shortage in decades. Bus stops emptied, reduced office hours, families resorting to wood and coal stoves for cooking. Power outages have been almost constant. For the US, this provides a huge bargaining chip. Cuba's own government now admits that it's in talks with the White House. The island nation needs to change its alignment. And the Chinese bases will be one of the conditions if Cuba wants the lights back on. But even if those bases are removed, the Gulf Coast remains a problem. The region is small, strategic, and loaded with assets under foreign investment rules. Really, the Gulf Coast is a ticking time bomb. China senses the window to take Taiwan is closing. So, will the Gulf Coast remain America's lifeline or become its Achilles heel? Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.